Hey guys, it's George here, and today we're going to be doing a live blocking video of the RTX 2080 Ti. With me, I've got Dan, who's our main water cooling guy here at PLE Computers Editon. How you doing, Dan?
Yeah, not bad. Yourself?
Yeah, I'm doing very well. So what we've got here today is we've got the EK Vector block and backplate, as well as the Gigabyte RTX 2080 Ti, and it's the WindForce OC edition. First things first, we're going to take a look at the two backplates that are available from EK, and that's one black one and one nickel one, so we got those here. We'll crack those open first, so do you want to open those up?
No worries.
And so the EK Vector water block and backplates, again, as I said, those are from EK. We'll take a bit of a look here just so you guys can tell at home what they look like, and if you're deciding on doing your own custom water cool build, maybe which backplate you think would suit. Now, typically that is, if you've got black fittings, you want a black backplate, and if you've got nickel fittings, you want a nickel backplate, but it's really a point of preference. So we got the black one right here. And we have the nickel one coming as well. But I'm really excited to block the RTX 2080 Ti today. Once we finish blocking the card, we're also going to do a few benchmarks, play around a little bit with the overclocking, but we won't do too much overclocking. But yeah, we'll do a few benchmarks. We'll probably use the superposition software to do that benchmarking at the end of today. Oh, that is shiny. Look at that. It's beautiful. That's so reflective. So you can probably see everything in the background there off the reflection of that. So we'll just grab both of those. Whoa. So black or nickel, whichever backplate you reckon suits you best. Again, what you probably want to do when you're putting your custom loop together is to get something that coincides with the fittings that you're using in the build. Next up, we'll probably undo the block. We'll get that out of the box and get the graphics card out of the box, and we'll get this blocking started. And so once we've got the block all together, we're going to put it on our Praxis wet bench over here. It's just our test system that we like to use for some of these videos. And we've got the water cooling loop all hooked up. Also, this Gigabyte card that we'll be blocking, we've already unboxed it and we've already tested that it boots. Obviously, if you're doing your own water cooled system, we always do recommend that you test the card and make sure that you get an image from it before you go to all the trouble of putting a block on and putting it into your custom loop, because man, it is so bad.
So you can give everybody a look.
Oh, definitely. So this is the new design from EK, obviously to fit the new RTX blocks. I mean, if you're looking at a big picture, it's pretty similar to I mean all the old water blocks, but definitely optimized for the new cards. In addition to all the stuff that you'd expect from a water block, you've also got RGB on the card. So I mean, obviously everyone loves a bit of RGB in your system. It's optional, you don't have to plug it in if RGB is not your style, but it does come with it looks like a 2020 RGB header that you can plug straight into the board, and you can get that RGB going. Yeah, I mean, have you heard anything about the new block, Dan?
From what I understand, they've revised the block design slightly. It's supposed to have increased flow rate as well as a slight performance improvement in temperatures, which I guess is something we're going to find out today once we've blocked it and we plug it all in. Yeah,
I'm really interested to see, like, really how much we can get down off the temperature of the card over using the stock cooler, because I've heard some pretty good things about it, so I'm pretty excited to get it all taken apart today. I think we should probably get that card cracked out as well, so we can start that blocking process. But yeah, man, that is a good looking card. But yeah, as I was saying, have taken this card out before this just to make sure everything's good to go. Once we got that card all blocked, we'll run on that superposition benchmark on the screen over here. And yeah, that's pretty much the agenda for today. Oh. And there's the Gigabyte WindForce graphics card. Man, it's a pretty long cooler. Hey,
it is
3 fans, all your cooling needs. And yeah, man, have you used this graphics card at all?
I haven't yet, but something else that is new about these cards that previous generation cards haven't is the addition of the new NV-Link bridge as opposed to the old SLI bridge. The idea behind NVLink is that it's supposed to treat both your graphics cards as a single card, so effectively this should function when running two cards as a 22 gig card as opposed to a single 11 gig card, which should result in much better multi-card scaling in terms of FPS and performance in games.
Yeah, and that's a pretty fun one as well, because NVLink cards aren't available to us yet, but they're on their way. And when we do get some NVLink bridges, we're probably going to do another video or another live stream testing them out, because I've heard and I've seen from a few other benchmarks online, those NVLink bridges actually have crazy gains in performance in comparison to the older SLI systems. So I'm really excited to see what that has in for us in the future.
So am I. Yeah, it should be really good.
No worries. Well, let's get all these boxes out of the way.
I need to hold on to this box.
You definitely.
See why in a moment.
That's all good. Well, you grab that electrostatic bag. Any of that you want to get off the bench? No worries. We'll probably change to our top mounted cam. We'll get this blocking started.
All right, let's get to it.
Yeah, brilliant.
Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is just remove all of these screws on top of the backplate. It's essentially just a matter of removing any screw you can see here on the top. They all need to come off for the cooler to separate from the card.
Now, it's looking like we've got quite a few screws there, taken out about 10 already. Is this comparable to cards you've seen from previous generations in terms of amount of screws you got to take out to get this card apart? Or?
Well, you'd be surprised. This is actually less screws than what you'd find on a lot of cards, such as your Asus Strix cards, your EVGA for the Win cards. They tend to have custom circuit board designs, which generally results in a lot more screws. Right, so...
Brilliant. So we're just going to pop that back part.
Just got to very carefully pull it apart.
As you can see, that's the whole cooler just popped right off after you've taken 10 screws out. That actually wasn't that big of a deal. I feel like I've seen a lot of the Founders Edition coolers for these cards have a lot more screws and a lot harder to get that heatsink off.
So this is effectively what your graphics card boils down to. It's a printed circuit board. As you can see here, you've got all 11 of your memory dies all around the outside here. You've got your main GPU here. This is the important part when it comes to cooling. So the next step is to remove the factory backplate. Got a couple of screws that we need to take out.
So while we get that back plate out, just want to quickly talk about 1080 Ti. So obviously the previous generation flagship card from NVIDIA, that was the GTX 1080 Ti. So stock's going to be slowing down on that one quite a bit because manufacturing stopped quite a while ago. Here at PLE Computers, we still have quite a bit of 1080 Ti stock for all those people who do want to purchase one of those older cards, but thing is that they are going to be running out a little bit over the coming months. So it's the sort of thing where it is really important to know about these new cards, the RTX series, because in a little while you probably won't have a lot of those older generation options, just because obviously they do stop manufacturing those when they start production of these new cards.
So what you'll have here on the back is your factory thermal pads. These are far thicker than the aftermarket ones that EK recommend. So it's best to just take those off and put them aside in case you ever need to put the factory cooler back on the card.
Right, so what's our next step
here? Now that we have the card pulled apart, I will have you pass me some instructions I printed out earlier. These are the first generation of EK water blocks where they haven't included the instructions in the box. They require you to use a phone or a tablet with a QR code scanner. to scan the code and load up the instruction manuals. But in order to save time, I've pre-printed the instructions.
No worries. And I mean, like, obviously, you know how to take a water block apart. So were you saying that you were just using these instructions to make sure that you got all those the pads in the right place?
Yep, I'm not sure if you guys can see that.
It's a pretty small picture.
It is a very small picture, but this here is a diagram of where you need to stick all of the thermal pads. You need to stick one on each of the 11 memory dies. In this photo they do show 12, but it's a reference photo from previous Titan cards that had 12 memory chips on them. You can also see you need thermal pads here and here just to cool other important components of the card.
Yeah, no worries. Well, we can't see that one too well because it's a pretty small photo.
It is a very small photo.
But yeah, so I guess let's get those pads on. Whereabouts are those?
So before I put the pads on, I do like to clean off the old thermal paste on the die there, because you'll be putting on new thermal paste that will perform better than the factory included thermal paste.
Brilliant. And so is that thermal paste that's provided by EK with the blocks?
Yes, they do include a tube of their ectotherm thermal paste, which from my own experiences is a very good thermal paste. Not just for GPU usage, but it actually works really well on CPUs as well.
And obviously they give you plenty of thermal paste in that tube, so next time you do a rebuild and maybe you take the thermal paste off your CPU, you can use that to reapply.
Yeah, you actually get enough in the tube to do several graphics cards or several CPUs.
That's very handy. Bit of extra premium thermal paste along with your purchase. So
the main thing here is just to make sure that die on the top is completely clean. It doesn't matter too much about the overflow around the outside, because that doesn't actually make contact with the water block. So you can just use a little bit of isopropyl alcohol, some cotton buds, a Q-tip, or just gently a microfiber towel, provided you keep it on the die and only on the die. But once that's clean, it's now ready for the application of the new thermal paste. But beforehand, we're going to apply the new pads. So you'll see when you go through the instructions when doing your own block that they don't actually include all of the right size pads. Some cutting to shape is required, but luckily the 11 memory pads are all included and are all the correct size. So you just go around and you stick one on each of these with the blue side facing up.
So while we're getting these thermal pads on there, it looks like I actually have a comment here from Battle Panda. He's asking about 8700K stock and if that's going to be coming soon. So the thing is that there is actually a pretty big shortage in terms of the stock of CPUs coming at the moment. So that affects both Intel and AMD. The stock for the 8700Ks is definitely coming soon. But we do have a bit of a shortage coming over the next few months. I think you'll see that on our website, some of the CPUs are limited in how many you can buy in a batch, just so we don't get people going and buying 20 of them in a single order. Yeah, for now, to answer that question, 8700Ks definitely on their way. Shouldn't be too much longer on those ones, yeah, just do keep in mind that those Intel CPUs and all CPUs are going to be a bit tight on stock over the coming months just because of that shortage. So how are we doing over here on the thermal pads?
So we've got the first lot of thermal pads on, the ones that I said are cut to size. With these next ones, you do have to trim it to size. So you'll notice I've trimmed this down to fit lengthwise on there. Need to take a little bit more off that.
Perfectly all the way over those chips.
Yep. Just going to shave a little bit off there. So that perfectly covers all of the chips there. It now needs to be cut smaller so that it's not hanging over so much.
Yeah, makes sense. So the ones for all these chips that are just immediately around the GPU, so they're all cut to size right out of the box.
They're all ready to go.
But the ones that are for like the full length, you need to just cut down the size yourself.
Yep. So you effectively just need to cut a small strip like that, and that sticks on just the same way as the others did. Peel the clear side off, stick it down, and then once you've done all of them, you can peel the blue side off and continue on. Right, so that should stick down there.
Yeah, brilliant.
And the next one.
So while we're doing those thermal pads, I'll touch briefly on RTX 2080 Ti's and their stock levels, because obviously we're just talking about stock for 8700Ks. So for the RTX 2080 Ti series, we've got stock trickling in still. So we've got a lot of orders in the system for a lot of people who wanted those cards right after launch, and we were able to fulfill a lot of those. But stock is still a bit tight, as is natural immediately after launch, so stock is trickling in. If you have a pre-order in at the moment and you're still waiting on your card, it shouldn't be too much longer. We're getting new stock every single week, so we're just churning through the queue of pre-orders, and we'll get through all those very soon, I'm sure. And yeah, so 2080 Ti's, it's also the sort of thing where if you get one of the more expensive RTX 2080 Ti variants with the large heat sinks, typically we do get a bit less stock of those. So something like the MSI 2080 Ti Trio, we probably get stock of that one a little bit slower than some of these gigabyte cards like the WindForce OC edition that we're blocking now. So yeah, just depending on which 2080 Ti you've put a pre-order in for, it might rock up a little bit slower, but we are fulfilling those pre-orders as they come. So looks like we're just peeling off.
Yeah, now this bit here is this is the tricky part when it comes to blocking a card.
Oh, this is the tricky part.
You've got to really get underneath these blue pads and peel them off to reveal the top of the thermal pad, so that you can get good conductivity between the GPU and the block, so that your components don't overheat.
Definitely is a bit fiddly, but to be honest, if you told me like the hardest part about blocking a GPU was peeling some plastic off these pads, I'd be a bit taken aback. I'd be like, surely that's not the hardest part.
I mean, it's probably the hardest part once you've done it a couple of times, because it's the part that doesn't really get any easier.
I mean, watching you do it, I'm getting frustrated on your behalf. I mean, oof. But hey, you're getting there. You're getting through them pretty quick. You can tell you had a lot of practice with it.
I mean, you don't want to have really short fingernails when doing this part, or you're really going to struggle.
Man, I should have offered to do it for you. I got really long fingernails at the moment. That's just about all done.
Yep. Now for the last two tricky ones. These are the long ones. There we go. And now for the last one.
No worries. So you all good for me to take these instructions away then?
Yep. I will say that compared to a lot of previous blocks I've done, this actually has less thermal pads on it. Traditionally, you'd have a thermal pad that covered this entire section along here, but this appears to have a lot less thermal pads, which is actually a really good thing.
Brilliant.
Makes it a lot easier to put the block on.
So what's next on your to-do
So
list?
the next thing is to put the thermal paste on the card. They give you a nice bag of screws with some caps to plug up the additional holes, and of course your tube of EK ectotherm thermal paste. So there are many different schools of thought on the best way to apply thermal paste to a CPU water block or a GPU. I generally tend to find using the star pattern method that EK recommend in their instruction manuals works quite well. You've got to be careful when you do it that you don't squeeze the thermal paste out too fast, otherwise you'll put very thick lines on and that will result in too much thermal paste. But if you do very thin lines, the star pattern works quite well.
Just want to make sure not to put too much thermal paste on the card. Hey, you don't want to end up like like a certain other video that was roasted a bit a few weeks ago.
Yep.
Make sure you're applying that very lightly. And that is perfect. It looks exactly like in the EK instruction manual.
Yep, so while that may look like a lot of paste, by the time you put the block on and that all flattens and smooths out, it should cover the die just about perfectly. And if you have a tiny bit too much on and it goes a little bit over the edge, that's okay. This stuff is non-conductive, so there's no risk of hurting your card, so don't stress too much if you put a tiny little bit on. but there is a fairly decent window in terms of too little versus too much as to where you'll still be in an okay temperature range that you'll still be happy with.
Yeah, no worries.
Alright, so the next step we have to do is to put the block onto the card itself. So I like to use this box, and you'll see why in a moment. George, have you got the block there for me?
Yeah, it's right there, man.
Alright, so first thing that I like to do before I press the block down is just line it up overhead and just see if I've missed any screws. Like in this case, there is one additional screw that they don't always outline in the instruction manual, which is just this one here in the corner. So the next thing you want to do is you want to take your water block. You want to just make sure this RGB cable is off to the side and out of the way, and then you want to just sort of, you can sight the screw holes up with the holes on the card, line it up and gently drop it down. Once you've done that, you can take the card, flip it over, and the reason I like to keep the box is so that you can hang the PCI Express bracket off the edge of the box to keep pressure on the card and block and keep them together while you're screwing them in. Alright, so the next step is to work with all of these screws. For some reason or another, EK like to give you a lot of screws in varying lengths, most of which you won't actually use, but I guess it's really good that they give you plenty of spare screws. So the first thing you want to do is, if you need to, check the instruction manual for which length you'll be using. In this case, it's the 4mm screws. You'll need a washer and a screw for each one. Generally speaking, I like to start with the 4 screws here, 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 and here, because that's where your main die is. So if you get pressure on that, it then becomes a lot easier to place the remaining screws around the card. This can be a bit of a fiddly process if you've never done this before, or even for someone who's done it quite a lot, but if you just take your time, check your instructions carefully, you should be fine. So these first 4 screws, I'm not tightening them down all the way, just because if you have to slightly move the block to get one of the other screws to line up, you won't be able to do that if you tighten the screws all the way down. Now after those 4 screws, I always like to take my backplate and side it up with the card to figure out which of these holes will be using screws from the backplate and which will be required to have their own screws from the block.
So I mean, while you're putting these screws through, Dan, did you want to maybe walk me through what you reckon the benefits of water cooling are at this point in time?
First and foremost, the biggest benefit to custom water cooling is temperature. You'll see far lower temperatures with a custom water loop than you will with a factory air cooler. For example, let's take just a stock reference 1080 Ti as a past example. They'll hit about 80 degrees under load. Under a custom water loop with adequate radiator capacity, you'll see temperatures between 35 and 45 degrees under load, which is almost half the temperatures that you'd see on air cooling. And the benefits of that is that firstly, it will slightly prolong the life of your components because they're not running as hot all the time, so they will last longer. But the other benefit is that in modern CPUs and GPUs, they have things like turbo boost and GPU boost, where they will overclock themselves and increase their own performance based on how cool they're running. So you'll squeeze more performance out of them even before doing any sort of overclocking.
There you go. And I mean, obviously thermals, like I feel like that'd be pretty handy coming up to the hot Australian summer that we're going to have pretty soon. I feel like it's the sort of thing, especially if if you're someone who doesn't have air conditioning in the room that your PC's in, and the ambient temperature around your PC is quite high. I feel like a water cooling loop it'd help a lot with that, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it definitely does help. You're going to be less affected by the hot air with a water cooling loop than you are with an air cooler, where the only thing it's relying on to keep it cool is air.
And that's just because water is just a better conductor of heat than air,
Yes.
right? Just yeah, okay, cool, very cool.
All right, so once we've got all of our screws here, you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spots that I haven't put screws in, just because that's where the backplate's going to go. So you want to just tighten up all your screws. You want to tighten them up to the point where they won't tighten up anymore by applying a small amount of force. You don't want to over tighten them, as you risk doing damage to the card, although I will say it's very unlikely you'll over tighten them, as the washer does help to absorb some of that force. Alright, so that's done. The next thing to do is I will need to refer to my instruction manual for the backplate, if you would mind, George.
No worries.
So I just need this page here. So just like the GPU itself, the backplate needs thermal pads, and these help to transfer heat from the back of the card to the backplate, which sort of acts as a passive heatsink. It gives slightly better cooling than not having a backplate on at all, but if you were to put it on without the thermal pads there, the heat would effectively get trapped in underneath the backplate and could potentially damage the card.
Yeah, I feel like, as you're saying, obviously having the back plate is a bit better for that cooling performance, but I feel like a big part of it's the aesthetics, right?
Yes, and there are actually a number of benefits. Aesthetics, for one, a backplate just looks really clean and really nice, but the other benefit to having a backplate is rigidity to the card. So if you've had a high-end card before, you've probably noticed some level of what's known as GPU sag, where the end of the card will fall down because it's just simply too heavy, whereas the backplate helps to provide a little bit of strength and helps to slightly reduce the amount of GPU sag.
Yeah, and of course, obviously you can get, there are a few high-end cases out there that provide mounts to help your GPU, to help stop GPU sag, but definitely the backplates can help with that. I can see how that would be, because obviously it's just a big chunk of metal on it. Definitely make it a lot more rigid.
As cards are getting more powerful and they're putting bigger and bigger coolers on them, they're getting heavier and heavier, so it's becoming more of a problem as time goes on. Which is another reason why I like water cooling, because you reduce an enormous amount of weight on the card, yet you see better performance than an enormous air cooler would otherwise.
Whereas, and after we have this backplate on, is that the card blocked? Is that pretty much everything done?
Effectively, yeah, that's everything done. You've just got to make sure to put your 2 plugs into the 2 GPU holes you won't be using, because you've got 4 ports for different configurations. If you don't plug those holes and you turn it on, you're going to have leaks.
Of course. But I'm really excited to get this one on the bench. Just from benchmarks that I've seen, I think the RTX 2080 Ti is really cool, because it's finally a card that lets you do that 4K 60 FPS just in that single card solution on a lot of AAA titles. And there are only a few games that you could probably squeeze out that 60 FPS of 4K on the 1080 Ti. Ones that come to mind, like GTA 5, you could play pretty comfortably at 60 frames and very rarely dip below 60 frames at 4K 60 FPS for that GTA 5 on the 1080 Ti. But with the RTX 2080 Ti, it definitely does really bring 4K 60 FPS into the realm of possibility for a lot more games. Stuff like Far Cry 5, Witcher 3, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, all those sorts of games, you can really get that 60 FPS and even a bit higher, 70, 80 frames per second in that single card solution. So I think it's pretty cool, because I remember when the 1080 Ti came out, I was sitting there like, what? I mean, I can't do 4K on a 1080 Ti. I don't know. It just felt pretty bad for me. But now that you got these RTX 2080 Ti's that are performing a bit better in that space, yeah, it's really exciting for me.
Yeah.
Sorry, are you missing something?
Do you mind just finding me there should be a bag of screws that came with the black backplate?
Oh, yes.
Should be amongst the rubbish there somewhere. Appears to have fallen down.
Man, where are these screws?
If we don't have them, that is actually perfectly fine, because you can very easily and very effectively still use the existing screws from the water block.
Don't worry, we won't have to do that because we've got the screws.
We're all good then. Now, they do include washers with the backplate. However, because you are screwing directly onto the metal backplate, and that's not actually making contact with any of the delicate components, you don't really need the washers. You can put them in if you really want, but it will affect the look of the aesthetics of the backplate. So this is really simple. You just start off each of the screw holes and just go around and screw them all in.
And I was talking about being able to play Shadow of the Tomb Raider 4K 60 FPS. It's also going to be one of the games that supports RTX. So there are a few titles that NVIDIA said that we're going to be able to support RTX, and none of them have those features enabled yet. But they're coming, and I think that's pretty exciting, because I mean, if you've seen some of the ray tracing demos, it's like, it really, I don't know, it really makes it a lot more realistic, having all the lights bouncing off everything and being able to see the reflections, and yeah, just having that in games like Shadow of the Tomb Raider and Battlefield 5, I just think it's going to be really cool.
Yeah, for anyone out there who is curious, if you look up on YouTube Battlefield 5 RTX demonstrations, NVIDIA did some really cool demonstrations at the launch of the RTX series cards, and it really gives you a good impression of why ray tracing can be a pretty impressive thing, and why I see it as the direction games are going to move in the future.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a bit unfortunate that we don't have that available to us right now, but it's something that's been so far outside the realm of possibility for so long. It's so cool that we're right at the forefront, about to be able to do something like that.
The fact that it can do real-time ray tracing is
real-time ray tracing, man.
Unbelievable. I know for doing movies and things, it could take up to 24 hours to do a single frame, but to do that in real time is an incredible feat of engineering. These cards are just something truly impressive.
No worries. So is that the card all blocked up?
Yeah, that's all done.
Brilliant. Well, let's clear the bench here, get on our test bench, and let's see how it performs.
Yeah, let's give this a shot.
I'm really interested to see what the thermals are like.
So am I. I'm hoping to see if these have been improved over EK's previous water block design. They certainly look nicer. Every generation they just improve the aesthetics of these blocks. They look fantastic. Alright, so over here we've got our Praxis wet bench. It's just a little test bench we use for trying out new hardware. As you can see here, we've got a little joint in the middle for when we want to add a GPU into the loop, just to make it quick and easy. Alright, so we unplug that one, unplug that one. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is get our fittings inside the card. And as I mentioned before, don't forget to put on your included plugs for the remaining holes, otherwise you're going to have a really bad time.
Imagine you put your GPU in your brand new build and you don't put the plugs on and you just flood the thing with coolant. I have nightmares about that sort of thing.
It is very important to leak test any first time loop, just to make sure, you know, things like this don't occur.
Obviously the Praxis wet bench that we have here is something that we've used plenty of times before, so we're pretty confident that it's not going to leak. But yeah, we do recommend that you do any leak testing on any custom water cooled builds that you do before you turn them on.
When you're doing your first leak test, if in the event you do get a leak, don't stress too much. Provided the system is completely 100% dry before you actually put power through the components, they shouldn't have been affected by the water leaking on the system, which is why it's a good idea just to power the pump up by itself and just make sure there are no leaks. So first one's in.
No worries. I'll go over here so you got a bit more space to work.
Yep, no worries.
We'll have to, oh.
Alright, so another thing I'm going to do here, I'm just going to plug in this RGB connector just so you guys can get an idea of what the RGB looks like on these new blocks.
Man, everyone loves a bit of RGB. I mean, this is obviously a red and black theme build, so it'd probably be a bit nice if we set the RGB to red, but
I must admit, I would actually prefer if my current block had RGB on it. It does look nice. Even for not having RGB, just setting it to a solid color, as George was saying, just a red light to accent the overall theme of the build. Alright, let's just double check everything's plugged in now.
no worries. So we've got to turn the power supply on.
Yep.
And then we've got to plug in our HDMI cable. No worries. How's everything looking?
Alright, so just make sure you always do a quick double check over all your fittings, make sure your compression rings are tight, all your caps are on. You don't want to forget to plug something in or plug up any caps. Yep, that all looks good.
No worries. What do you want
I
to...
think we're about ready to hit the power button and see what happens. Now, as you can see there, the water is flowing out of the loop, forcing the air into the top of the reservoir. You can see at the moment it is completely full of air bubbles. That it's doing its first time power cycle.
Do we have the... Yeah, all the peripherals plugged in.
Now, all these air bubbles in the system, they will drain over time into your reservoir. What you can do is take the cap off the top of the reservoir to let the air escape.
So, hey, sorry.
Yeah, that's right.
I think we should probably power the GPU.
Ah, yes, of course. My mistake.
Just quietly.
Yeah. As an important note, you should always plug power into your graphics card, otherwise you're not going to get a display.
just an important note in case you guys didn't know. Probably should put power into your graphics card.
Alright, so now that we have power, we will very likely have a lot more success than we did just before.
Brilliant. Are you sure you haven't missed any other cables?
Okay, yeah, now I'm sure I haven't missed any other cables.
Brilliant. I feel like it's a really great mistake to make on live stream. I don't know about you.
Yeah. I mean, as a technician, it has happened before. I've seen it happen with other people.
What's worse, forgetting to plug in your PCI power or plugging your HDMI cord into your motherboard instead of your graphics card? Which one's more of a noob trap?
I'd say forgetting to plug in your PCI Express power. If you're putting in a graphics card, you usually you want to plug it into the graphics card. But I have seen both instances where people have plugged it into the motherboard or where they've forgotten to plug in the PCI Express power.
No worries. So let's see. Are we getting an image over here?
HDMI connected.
Let's just see. Might give it a bit of a reboot. What do you reckon?
Yeah, worth trying.
Because we've got this running through a capture card, so you guys can see the benchmark on stream as well. So we're probably just going to want to make sure that those HDMI cords are plugged in the capture card pretty firmly as well, and make sure there aren't any problems with the rest of our setup. And then yeah, we should be pretty good. Worst case scenario, we'll plug the graphics card straight into the monitor, so that you guys can take a look at the benchmarks. But yeah, we'll see how it goes. So while we're getting this all up and running, if you guys want to see some RTX cards in action, it looks like we're getting an image over here, so that's pretty good.
There we go.
Well, let's make sure we get into Windows. But yeah, if you guys want to see the RTX cards in action, and you're in Melbourne, we're going to be at PAX in a couple weeks' time. We're going to have tons of RTX display systems, so if you can't go and grab an RTX card yourself and put something together like this, you can always come down and give some of the PCs a try. So that's going to be really cool. Obviously, if you're not in Melbourne or you're not coming to PAX, maybe you're in Perth instead, we've got an event there as well. We're going to be partnering with Flak Test Gaming, and we're going to have a booth there we're at Telethon. Sorry, I'm not from Perth, but it's we're gonna have a bit of a booth there. We're gonna have an RTX system there, so you can check that out as well. We're gonna have a few comps going at Telethon as well. So if you want to check out either our booth at Telethon or PAX, and you want to get more involved with PLE, then we'll be really happy to see you there. But I think we've got this all going after that reboot.
We've got a display.
That's brilliant. Alright, well, let's get that superposition benchmark running. And
first thing I'll do though is I'll load up what's known as MSI Afterburner. This is a free utility online.
Hey, sorry, you might. I think we got a microphone over here, so if we're going to talk, maybe we talk off this way.
So this software, MSI Afterburner, is designed to overclock your card. It's also got a lot of nifty features built into it, where you can see your frame rate in games, you can see your temperature in games, your clock speeds. So it's just a really useful utility to have if you want to play around with custom water cooling and overclocking of components. So the first thing we're going to do is run a benchmark completely stock just to see how it scores, and then we're going to do a little bit of overclocking and see what we score in comparison.
Brilliant. So the superposition benchmark, would you say that that's industry standard for benchmarking, or a pretty popular benchmark?
The Unigine benchmarks have been the standard for a number of years. They've had Heaven, they've had Valley, they've now got superposition. These are really good benchmarks to stress out your card, get some really good results, and then compare your results online to other people who have similar systems to see how yours compare.
Well, let's get it going, man.
Yep, so I'm going to run this at the default 4K optimized setting without tweaking any settings, just to get a good baseline, and we'll see how we go. So as you can see there in the top left corner, it is quite small, but you do have your GPU temperatures. I've got your CPU temperature up as well, just to keep an eye on your CPU, make sure your water loop's all functioning as intended.
It's pretty good. So, I mean, I've heard... There we go.
That's better.
Just muting that PC there so you can hear us talk. So, I mean, I've heard that the stock for this air cooler, when you're pushing it on a benchmark like this, probably goes up to about 60 degrees on the card.
Yep, sometimes even up to 80.
Yeah, so what sort of thermals are we getting there?
Currently we're sitting at 38 degrees.
38 degrees? So you're saying that we're about 20 degrees below the stock cooling levels, you reckon?
I'd say at least 30.
At least 30?
The good thing with water cooling is it doesn't tend to heat up a lot over time, whereas generally speaking, the longer air coolers run, the more the air in your case heats up and warmer they'll get, especially in really long gaming sessions. Whereas water cooling tends to remain fairly stable even after long gaming sessions.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so I mean that's pretty good. I mean, obviously a wet bench like this is probably going to be what I consider like optimal conditions. In the way that surely it's going to be a bit cooler since it's really open air. In comparison to something like a case, or is that not so correct?
Well, yeah, it is It is slightly less important to have good airflow when it comes to water cooling because your radiators just provide so much cooling, but you still need air to take the heat away from the radiators. So you still want really good airflow inside whatever case you've got your water cooling system in. Otherwise, you might find your temperatures are hotter than you'd like, just due to the fact that the radiators are overheating because there's not enough airflow to cool them down effectively.
Brilliant. So, how much longer do you reckon the benchmark goes for? How long superposition?
Well, we're currently at scene 12 out of 17, so we're past the halfway mark.
Brilliant. And so what's our frame rate sitting there at the moment?
Currently, we're sitting at an average of 89 frames at 4K.
89 frames at 4K. That's pretty good. Have you used superposition on any other cards recently, like a 1080 Ti? Maybe provide some comparison.
When I first tried it out on my own 1080 Ti almost 12 months ago, I was seeing around 35 to 40 frames. It's possible they have released updates that have improved the performance, but just the difference alone is very impressive. The fact that this can do it at nearly 100 frames at 4K. That's not something we've ever seen before.
That's brilliant. So that should just be finishing up there. Let's see what we get score-wise.
So as you can see there, we've scored 11,765 with an average frame rate of 88 frames per second.
88 frames a second with almost 12,000 on that score. So did you want to maybe open up MSI Afterburner, change the clock speeds around a little bit and see if we can get anything more out of this card?
Yep.
See if we can really push the water cooling to the limit.
Alright, so the first thing you want to do here, you'll see there where it says power limit and temperature limit. I always like to max out the power limit just to allow the GPU to have a little bit more power. Of course, you want to make sure you've got an adequate power supply, especially when overclocking, because you'll increase the power draw of your system.
No worries. Oh, it looks like we got another question here. So we've got Maddie on Facebook asking about the RTX 2070. At this stage, we don't have information available on those 2070 cards. Yeah, we just don't have anything that we can really say about them at the moment. I'm hoping that we do get a bit more information over the coming weeks or months. But yeah, at this stage, we don't have any information on those. But 2070 would be pretty exciting because, I mean, I know a lot of people do like that middle of the range sort of graphics card. So yeah, we'll let you know more information when we come across it.
Alright, so today I'm just going to do a very basic overclock. You can see there where it says core clock and memory clock. I've just boosted the core clock, which is your main performer in terms of frames per second, by 100 megahertz. I haven't played with the memory clock. You can also play with the voltages on a card, however that is getting a lot more in depth with overclocking, and that can be a little risky, so if you're going to do that, make sure you do your research and make sure you know what you're doing before getting into it. An overclock like this, I would expect to probably see maybe a 5% performance improvement just for the click of 2 buttons. It takes 2 seconds and you'll get a nice performance bump out of it.
And obviously the idea is that when you overclock your card, it runs a bit hotter, runs a bit faster. So the idea is that if you don't have a good cooling solution, setting your cards at higher clocks can lead to some problems if you don't have a good cooling solution. But that's obviously not an issue when you're water cooling a card like this. When the card was sitting at whatever it was, 30 degrees while we were benchmarking it there, we've obviously got a lot of headroom to play with and get higher clocks. So do we want to get the benchmark going and see how it performs?
Yeah, let's see if we get any improvement.
It's the sort of thing where obviously we're only doing some very minor overclocking here, just changing the clock speeds a little bit, but it's the sort of thing where you can spend hours and hours overclocking your card to get the most juice out of them as you can. That's not something we'll do on stream here because, I mean, we'll be on stream for hours sort of thing, but every card's different and it's the sort of thing you can play around the voltages, those clocks, and really get the most out of your card. And that's something that really does open up a lot more with water cooling because your card stays a lot cooler and you can get those higher speeds out of your card without the card getting too hot and turning itself off or throttling.
So it appears we might have just lost display.
We lost display?
Yes.
What have we done?
It is possible that overclock isn't quite stable just yet. It might require a little bit more voltage.
Oh, no, we're back. So wait, are you saying that at that overclock, with that base voltage, it crashed the benchmark?
Yes, because generally speaking, these WindForce overclock cards are already overclocked from factory, so you won't be able to squeeze as much out of them in terms of overclocking as you would with a reference card that isn't overclocked. But you certainly wouldn't be able to squeeze this extra performance out on the air cooling. So what you do in this situation, if you do get a crash, you just back the core clock off ever so slightly and try again.
Okay, well let's get this
stable.
Let's get it running.
So let's give it a shot and see what happens.
Looks like we'll just do 4K again on this new clock. That's looking pretty good to me.
Yep. So,
Did we get to this point just before? Sorry, I was speaking, so I didn't see.
No, we didn't get this far.
So we didn't get that far before. So it looks like that's fine. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, as we were saying, I mean, if you get a Founders Edition card, say, those ones aren't typically clocked high outside of the box. If you get something like this Gigabyte WindForce OC, just out of the box, is clocked a little bit higher, so you don't have as far to go with some of these overclocking options because it's already up there. But yeah, definitely if you play around with the voltage and you put that time in and really feel around the settings, you can get a lot more out of your card. And again, the caveat is just that it does make the card hotter, and without a better cooling solution, you can't really get the most out of your card, which is something that the water cooling a card like this really does provide.
So you can see currently with this slight overclock and the 10% power increase to the card, we're sitting at 41 degrees under load.
41 degrees under load, so that's gone up by about 10 degrees, raising the core clock there.
I wouldn't even say 10 degrees, it's gone up.
But what about the frames per second? I mean, just on the onset, are we looking at an increase in performance?
There is a slight increase in performance. We won't really be able to tell until we have the average, minimum, and maximum results from the end of the benchmark.
Which obviously
the frame varies so much.
Yeah, why we go through all these scenes. There, it looks like it's cut out on us again. So I think the idea is that you probably want to provide the card with a bit more voltage.
Overclocking it's a lot of trial and error. You've just got to keep working at it until you find something that's stable. And some cards will overclock better than others.
No worries. Well, how about we lower that core clock just a little bit more,
Yep.
See if we can get another run. But I don't think we'll try too many more.
Yeah. It is something you could spend.
You could spend hours, days on this, getting really the highest clock out of your card.
And it is something that a lot of people do for fun. They'll water block their cards and they'll spend hours and hours just going through and getting the best overclocks they possibly can.
Yeah, but for us today, I mean, this was more so a blocking live stream, give you a bit of a run through of the different back plates and the different options for the card, and then actually showing you how to get the block onto your card and giving you a bit of a run through of this new GPU that we have in front of us here. And obviously this bit of an overclock, this bit of a benchmark here was a bit of a bonus, so we won't spend hours and hours getting the optimal clock for it. That's probably something for another live stream where maybe we sit down and really get the highest clocks possible. But for this one, I reckon we'll just give this benchmark like one more go, see if we can get a higher clock without too much fiddling. But otherwise, I think that'll be about it for the live stream once we've got this benchmark out of the way. But no, this was I think this was really cool, Dan. I mean, like getting this block out, getting it all blocked, getting on the test bench, checking out the benchmarks. I mean, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean, I do have a lot of fun blocking cards. I will say it is a very fun experience. If you've always wanted to try it, I mean, why not? It's something really enjoyable. It's something you've done yourself. You'll have something that not many people do in their systems that is yours. You've made it. You've put it together. And it's unique. You can make your loop look however you want.
Yeah, and that's really the beauty of custom building PCs. It's the sort of thing where if you're not really the type of person who wants to go and block your own card and do your own custom water cooled build, obviously PLE, we provide the service to custom water cooled PCs. Dan here does a lot of the builds for Heatherton, but obviously we've got a lot of stores over in Perth as well. If you do, yeah, if you're not someone who wants to put the days and hours into making your own custom water-cooled PC, you can just jump on our website at ple.com.au and put together your own custom water-cooled build. You can choose whatever parts you want. We'll liaise with you on the fittings and the coolant, and really making it so that you get your whole build exactly how you want it. And obviously, custom water-cooled builds are always a little bit more dedicated than, your standard build. But it provides a lot more opportunities for customization and a lot higher performance typically out of something like this. So yeah, definitely if you want to do your own custom water-cooled builds, we do sell the parts individually for that. But if that's not something that you're keen for, but you do want a custom water-cooled build like this and you don't want to have to put the effort in for it, you can check out all our products and our services online and see if there's something that we offer that suits you and the custom build that you want to go for. Because as Dan was saying, at the end of the day, it's about getting a build that's unique to you and something that's special for you. So yeah, check out the website or give us a call and we'll be happy to help you out.
Alright, so it looks like our benchmark's just about done.
Thank goodness we were able to get through that one with a bit of a lower clock.
It's just a quick overclock.
So 12,237. So the score's gone up by 500 points, with the average frames going up by about, what was it, 10 or 5 or 10?
Yeah, about 5 frames.
5 frames.
So not a huge improvement right away, but it is a slight improvement just for clicking 2 buttons, and you can always get more performance out of it, as I said, by just playing with the overclocking and taking your time. I would expect you could probably push it up to about 95 frames with some work, which is still, it's a 10% performance improvement over what you get on air, and the other advantage is, of course, much lower temperatures.
No worries. Well, I'm sure you could probably push it even a bit further if you wanted to, if you really sat down. So 95, I feel like you probably get relatively easy. Maybe if we sat here for another half an hour, so we could probably push 95, not too hard. Again, it depends on the card. Some chips you can overclock them a bit more than others before they start having instability issues. But I feel like you probably push it a bit further than 95 if you try it and you had a good card.
Yeah, you can get some really good results out of overclocking under custom water.
Yeah. So obviously we were talking a bit about the advantage of custom water cooling before, but inherently you look at a build like this and there's a lot of maintenance there. I actually see there's a question from Battle Panda again. How often do you need to replace coolant? And obviously
so
the water cool specialist over here.
This one is going to depend on the type of coolant you'd like. There are a couple of different types. As you can see, we've just got a transparent coolant here. There are your solid, sort of milky style coolants that they need to be replaced more frequently. So for the solid coolants, I'd say you're looking at replacing them every 6 months. For coolants like this one here, which is what we use in most of our builds, they can go as long as 12 to 18 months without needing to be replaced.
12 to 18 months, but you probably wouldn't want to leave them too much more than that.
You ideally wouldn't. It will depend on your use case, but I like to replace them every 12 months, and I've never had a problem.
No worries. And when you said between see-through and more, you said more milky ones, that's probably comparing this, which I think is EK Cryo Fuel Coolant.
Yep, that's EK Cryo Fuel. And
I think we have a few Mayhem's coolants that behave like this as well, compared to something like a C1000 from Thermal Take or a View from Primo Chill. Those sorts of coolants probably you're gonna want to replace those more because they're a thicker coolant and they're more predisposed to gunking up your loop. So sorry, just a question for you. Does how you use your computer affect how often you should replace the coolant? So say, is it like if you use your computer, if you keep your computer on 24/7, does that mean you need to replace your coolant more or less?
Generally speaking, yes, you'd want to replace your coolant more often if you're using it more, because as the coolant gets warm, it will slightly speed up the process of the component or products inside the coolant breaking down. So if you don't use your computer a lot, your coolant will last a lot longer because it's effectively just water sitting still.
So probably that 18th month that you said, that upper limit is if you don't use your computer much and you have this clear coolant, you could probably do it for 18 months between changes. But you're saying if maybe you use it more like 10, 12 hours a day and use it pretty much every day, you probably want to get closer to that 12 months, maybe even
12 months.
Maybe even a bit sooner, if you wanted to be safe about it. Because I mean, replacing the coolant, it doesn't have to be a big deal, right? You can always install a drainage loop.
Which I'm not sure if you guys can see, but we've got a tap over here on the end of our loop. Effectively, you just open the tap and all your coolant drains out. You close the tap, fill it up with new coolant, and you're good to go again.
Yeah, so I mean the idea is that if you plan ahead, you can have that draining part of the loop so that it's not a huge hassle to drain your whole loop and refill it with coolant. And yeah, so
what do you reckon? Do you want to try boosting the core clock maybe a little bit higher, giving it another shot, seeing if you can squeeze a little bit more out of it?
Yeah, I mean, if you have some settings you want to play with.
One more run?
Yeah, okay, sure.
We'll see how we go.
Sure. I mean, I feel like we've got just a tad bit more time, so if we want to try and boost it up just a tad. Because, I mean, like, 75, like, that's okay. And, like, we got your 500 score, but, I mean, there's something about me that always wants, like, push just that little bit more.
So if you really want to go all out, you could squeeze it out 1 megahertz, do a benchmark, 1 megahertz, do a benchmark, until you find that exact point where it's no longer stable.
Yeah, and obviously it's not just changing the core clock. There's a lot more that you can do to customize, to overclock your GPU. So
there is also the memory clock, which is not as important in terms of frames per second, but it will help things. It will help things when you're overclocking.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, can give this another go. So what were we before? Was it 1200? 12.
So the first one we tried was 100.
Yeah.
And then that didn't boot at all, so we backed it to 90. That started and got halfway through and failed, so we went all the way down to 75. So now we've worked it up to 82.
Okay.
And the idea would be to find the middle ground between that 90 and 75 that it's still stable at. And then you can always increase the voltage a tiny bit, which will allow you to push the megahertz a little bit higher. But as I said, make sure you do your research on that, because pushing the voltage too high can be a bit of an issue.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, it's the sort of thing where upping your core, your clock speed, and really overclocking your GPU means you can get more performance, which can be it can be pretty important for some of these 4K 60 FPS games that you got going. So it's the sort of thing where, I mean, I rattled off a few titles before, like Tomb Raider and The Witcher 3, which you can pretty comfortably stay above that 60 FPS for the duration of your gaming session. But there are going to be other AAA titles that maybe are it's a bit harder to get that solid 60 FPS. So overclocking means that for some of those games that require I don't know if they're a bit harder to reach that 60 FPS and stay there, yeah, the overclocking can really help that. And again, water cooling helps overclocking. It's a bit of a chain.
So as we can see from our temperatures, we're still sitting at a flat 42 degrees currently, and the temperature does not appear to be increasing above 42. And I'll actually say that is...
You just said the temperature wasn't increasing above 42, but now it's 50, so...
Well. You're looking at the CPU temperatures there, George.
Oh, yeah.
The CPUs at
so
50 degrees,
it's not
GPUs at
increasing
42.
above 42.
I will say, in my experience, compared to the previous generations of water blocks, this is actually a noticeable improvement in temperatures. A 1080 Ti that I've run on this is sat at about the 48 to 50 degree mark, so while it's not huge, it's an improvement. These new blocks are a good design.
It's brilliant. I'm really glad to hear that the design of the blocks making it so that you can get some better water cooling performance out of these cards. Because I mean, at the end of the day, when you water cool your PC, you don't want to just go halfway for it, right? You want to really go all out. And I mean that's. I mean, have we taken a look at the RGB on this card yet? Because I mean, that's looking pretty good.
It does look very nice.
Yeah, it's a sort of thing where it's opened it up a lot more. If you're the type of person who wants every component in your system to be full RGB, I mean, these EK blocks just add another component in there that can be that bit of unicorn vomit that everyone loves so much nowadays. I mean, you go on Reddit or Facebook and you see photos of PCs that people are posting, and so many of them are just like jam-packed with the RGB. So I think EK's made a pretty good move in terms of adding RGB there. Obviously, you don't have to use it if you don't want to, but it's always nice to have that option.
So as you can see there, while our score did go up, the average frames didn't increase a whole lot, but there is still an improvement. And it does get quite fun just trying to squeeze that last frame per second out. And if we had the time, we could spend hours just tweaking it and tweaking it just to get that perfect overclock.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, Yeah, is there any other clocks that maybe you want to try? Any other settings that want to try? Maybe get a higher result out of there.
Let's have a look here. I'll see what we can do.
Yeah, so I mean, I was talking about PAX a little bit earlier. That's in 2 weeks' time now, so we're gonna have a pretty big booth there. As I said, we're gonna have tons of RTX PCs, tons of comps, tons of giveaways. So stay tuned for more information on that. But definitely, if you're coming down to PAX, you already got your ticket. Find the PLE booth. We're gonna be huge, so it's gonna be really good to see everyone there and have everyone participating in those giveaways, because we love giving away the free stuff at the events like that. And yeah, no, it'd be really good to see all you guys. If you don't have a ticket, definitely do check if there are any tickets left. But I think all the main days, like 3 Pass, Friday, Saturday, last time I checked, were definitely gone. But definitely would recommend finding your way down to PAX. And again, if you're in Perth, don't want to make the flight down to Melbourne for PAX this year, Telethon will be there. Got some good comps and stuff going. So what's the clock for this benchmark that we got going
I
now?
left the core clock the same, but I've tried to overclock the memory clock by 50 megahertz. Memory is a little bit trickier to overclock, but it can also provide a boost to performance. Memory is more important when running higher resolutions.
So you reckon that when you're boosting the memory clock, it's not going to have as big of a performance at the lower resolutions, but maybe for 4K or particularly like that 8K benchmark that I saw there, you get better results?
Yep, in my experience, the memory clock does help get your frames out of those higher resolutions.
Do you reckon for 4K it's going to have a big impact?
I'd say 4K is where you're going to start to see a decent impact.
Yeah, brilliant. So it's the sort of thing where it's like if someone is getting this water-cooled setup and they do want to dabble a bit in overclocking, and they are doing that 4K gaming, as I said, is now more possible with this RTX 2080 Ti. You're saying that if they're doing that 4K gaming, looking at that memory clock and playing around with that a bit more is going to have some positive results for them.
Yep, I would say so. And as you've seen me do, it's always best to go up in small increments, and then if it's not stable, back it off. Don't just try and chuck 500 onto the core, 500 onto the memory and give it a shot. That's not really a safe option.
Yeah, brilliant. So you sort of just want to go up little by little and find really the peak of the card before it decides that it doesn't want to work some of the time.
Yeah, that's effectively all overclocking is.
Yeah. I mean, obviously it's all about stability, so that there are some times where you push to an unstable level and you'll game for a little bit and it'll still be fine, but the idea is that if you can't have a long gaming session with the card at that level, probably wouldn't be considered stable. I mean, you don't want to be in the middle of a gaming session and have your card shut off because you've clocked it too high. So you really want to make sure that you get the highest clock that you can get without pushing it too far and having your gaming sessions interrupted by crashes or blue screens. Worries. And obviously you were talking a bit earlier today about those NVLink bridges that are coming.
Yep.
I reckon it's going to be pretty cool because SLI wasn't super popular for the 1080 Ti's because obviously you didn't get too much of a gain from putting a second 1080 Ti in there because it had like that sort of diminishing returns thing. Like you got a bit of performance, but it wasn't a crazy amount of performance from it. But the idea with these NVLink bridges and the NVLink technology is that it's sort of like SLI, but you get like way more performance out of it than usual, right?
Yeah, you'll see if an NVLink is adopted by the developer, you can see as much as an 80% performance improvement just by adding a second card.
That's amazing. Obviously a pretty expensive setup, 2 high-end GPUs and an NVLink bridge and all the other parts that can go into that. But I'm really excited to see some systems out there that are water-cooled, dual graphics card, NVLink. Who knows, maybe next video we'll do something like that. But it looks like here for the results we've pushed it a little bit, but it looks pretty similar to the last one, to be honest.
Yep, so it went up sort of almost half a frame, which is not a huge improvement, but once again it is still an improvement, and any improvement is better than none.
No
so
worries.
yeah, you can just keep going and keep getting your performance out of it.
That's all good. I think that's going to be about it for the video today. I do have one thing to tell you. If you are looking at getting an RTX 2080 or an RTX 2080 Ti, either of those RTX series cards, we have a promotion at the moment where you get a free Cooler Master keyboard along with one of those RTX graphics cards. It's a limited edition NVIDIA style keyboard. I think the the spacebar has some NVIDIA branding on it, and it's all GeForce logos. It's all pretty cool. But you get a free one of those Master Keys keyboards along with your graphics card if you purchase right now. So I think we're going to keep running that promotion just for a little while longer. But yeah, if you go to ple.com.au and you check out those RTX cards, we do have those keyboards bundled along with them. So just make sure, it's more so if you look to grab an RTX card through us, make sure you don't forget about that bundle, because we've had a lot of people not realize that they get that free keyboard, and then we've had to chase them up after them. We're like, oh, here's your free keyboard, man. So just make sure, free keyboard with an RTX card right now. So thanks for watching today. It's been really fun blocking this card, getting it in the test bench, doing some benchmarks. It's really good to have all you guys along just watching and having a good time. So yeah, you got anything you want to say, Dan?
Yeah, I hope you guys all enjoyed watching it. I hope it gave you some idea of what water cooling is and how it's done, and just to give you guys an idea that we are able to do this for you in the event that you're not confident doing it yourselves. You're in good hands if you leave it to us.
Yeah, but we will plug in the power cables though.
Yes,
if
yeah,
we do
I
a custom
promise
system
that,
for you, we test them.
I won't forget the power
We
cables.
test the power
next time.
cables. But no worries. Thanks for watching, guys. It's been great, and we'll see you for the next live stream.
Thanks.
I just have to play out the other piece.